are cryptocurrencies? Is it hype? Is it something real? They seem to be all around us. Everyone seems to be interested. I think this is what we want to discuss. And to start us off, Shehnaz, perhaps you can tell us what are cryptocurrencies? Are they really currencies? And what does the crypto part of it really mean?
Sure. So I think initially when it originated, it was designed to be a sort of a currency. But I think over the course of years, it has changed slightly. Now, the term crypto assets is a very widely and perhaps a very misunderstood term, and is used to refer to different kinds of digital assets, which is essentially based on a particular technology known as the distributed ledger technology. Over the course of years, different types of crypto assets have started to emerge, some without any underlying value, and some with some sort of a stabilization mechanism or with an underlying value that is attached to some sort of a asset.
So, Vidushi, just once again, let's break down these terms, right? We have on the one hand currency, and we have on the one hand the term asset. Now, these are terms which have very specific meaning. And I think people sometimes use them interchangeably. But when we're talking about cryptocurrency, we have to be careful about it, right?
Right. Right. Thanks, Alok. So when we look at currency as a general concept, it's usually referred to as legal tender that is acceptable for buying and selling goods and services. That's actually not the case with crypto, and that's for two primary reasons. Firstly, crypto is not issued by the government. Secondly, it's not guaranteed by the government or guaranteed by any particular jurisdiction. And that's why crypto is different from what we typically understand as currency.
But what Shehnaz also mentioned is that it could be an asset. But an asset, the common understanding is that it's a house or it's something which generates money for you. So would cryptocurrencies be considered an asset, and what would they be in those terms?
That's actually very interesting because, as Shehnaz mentioned, crypto doesn't necessarily always have an underlying asset that grants it its value. Its value largely comes from acceptability within the community of users. It often comes from how regulation around the crypto in question is sort of structured. It comes from the technology that's underlying that crypto. So, I mean, to directly answer your question, yes, it may be looked at as an asset given that it has a value. However, it's necessary to understand that that value is extremely volatile given that there is no underlying asset, given that there isn't always necessarily an underlying asset that guarantees that value.
Yeah. And if we were to compare it to, say, the value of a house, the value of a house, say, moves in sort of predictable directions, up or down. Maybe it might sometimes go a little bit up, a little bit down. But if you take the instance of, say, Bitcoin, perhaps the most popularly traded cryptocurrency, its value has gone up as high as $68,000 per Bitcoin, all the way down to like 30,000 in just the course of 1 year, right? It's doubled in value, and then it's shrunk to half its value in just the course of the year. So, which is the point that you have made, Vidushi, that the volatility means the fact that it goes up and down in price so much means that it is probably not so easy to use it as a currency. So what we are calling cryptocurrency may even be the wrong term for it. The intent may have been to use it as currency, but it is actually more of an asset where any two people can agree that this is an asset and this is what the value is. To give you another example, art, for instance, it is a physical object, but nobody can say that all paintings by one painter should cost exactly so much, or by another painter so much, and so on. So, which is why, as an asset, you and me and a group of people can price it however we want to, which we can't necessarily do with the currency, because, and if any of us have taken out that 100 rupee note and read it closely, what does it say? It says that the governor of the Reserve Bank of India promises to pay the bearer a sum of 10 rupees. So that particular note has a very particular value, which is 10 rupees. Now, in some very exceptional situations, that value can collapse or it can become completely meaningless. But even then, in a sense, when I give that 10 rupees to you, it is worth exactly 10 rupees. We can't call it 50, we can't call it 100, because nobody else is going to agree with us on that front. So in that sense, maybe I think this term perhaps should be what is changed, this cryptocurrency term is perhaps what is causing a lot of people confusion, but it is crypto asset, perhaps, which might be a better thing. Now, in terms of assets, there are two kinds of assets, right? And Vidushi, you spoke about this. One kind of asset has some sort of underlying value, whereas the other is simply agreed upon between the two parties. So, for example, a share, right? A share in a company is linked in some way to the performance of the company, how it's doing in the in the market, and people buy and sell at various points. And you can have objective measures like earnings per share, what are the share price of the company as opposed to the revenue of the company, and so on. But with say things like commodities, with commodities, we don't know how much a barrel of oil or a bar of gold costs. It's just what we agree between ourselves. So maybe Shehnaz, if you could sort of take us through some of the ideas about how an asset can have an inherent value or something, it can have underlying value, or how that value can be decided by people.
Sure. So I think that's also a sort of a confusion that has come when it comes to the regulation of crypto assets. I think a lot of times there have been policymakers, there have been proponents from the industry that have said that let's start to regulate it as an asset. But as you have correctly said, assets can be of different types, one with an underlying value. But I think the problem with crypto asset is the fact that there is, in most cases, they do not really have an underlying value, and its value derives by the expectation that somebody else will value it. So in this case, actually, the regulatory framework for crypto assets, the way it has evolved is that people are now trying to look at the use cases of the crypto assets as opposed to trying to determine what perhaps is its underlying value. Because I think the question of underlying value comes only in cases of crypto assets where it is pegged to some sort of a asset. For instance, if we look at what has now started to emerge as known as stable coins, an example being Libra, that was announced by Facebook a couple of, I think 2 years back, where the idea was to kind of peg it to a basket of currencies. Now, when we look at that, perhaps it's easier for us to then kind of think of it as a sort of a crypto asset with some sort of an underlying value. But in most cases, in most crypto assets, you will not find that. So I think when regulators are now trying to think about regulations for these kind of crypto assets, what they are essentially looking at is that what are the use cases of these crypto assets, whether they are being used for the purposes of exchange as a medium of exchange, whether they are being used for the purposes of accessing services that is being provided by a particular entity that is issuing those kind of tokens or crypto assets, or whether it is giving giving people who invest in those crypto assets a right in the governance of that particular enterprise which is issuing that crypto token. So I think these are the different ways in which policymakers are looking at ways to regulate them.
Yeah, and Shehnaz, perhaps one of the more important things that is emerging is what you talked about as what you mentioned as Libra and this category of stable coins. And you mentioned that they are pegged to another asset, to a basket of currencies. So maybe it would be good to explain how are they pegged to a basket of currencies, and what does a peg mean in this context?
So typically, it will mean that their value, unlike cryptocurrencies, whose value, as you correctly said, that there is no stability in their value. There is extreme volatility, and in most cases, people don't even know what triggers that volatility. So to deal exactly with this volatility issue, what some issuers are doing is essentially saying that the value of this particular token or coin will be attached to the value of perhaps say a US dollar at that particular point in time. It may be a basket of currencies, or it may also be like one particular currency, like it might be pegged to the US dollar itself. So in that sense, what essentially happens is that you still have an understanding of what one stable coin will be equivalent to. So I think it's essentially to deal with this volatility issue of crypto assets.
And which brings me to the next point, and perhaps something which most people think of when they talk about cryptocurrency. And perhaps this is where a lot of conversation has started, as a result of which causes this confusion. It's about its potential use to hide money trails, or rather to hide from regulators, illegal activities being carried out to hide the money trail behind this. We have heard that cryptocurrency is going to be used for, is being used for hiding black money. It is being used to hide proceeds of crime. It is being used for corruption. It is being used on the so-called dark web to buy to buy illegal products so on from the internet. So maybe Vidushi, you can talk us a little bit as to how is it that this particular quote unquote cryptocurrency, as they say, why do people tend to associate it with illegal activities in this way?
Well, one of the reasons for that, and I think the primary reasons for that, is the degree of anonymity that's associated with transferring cryptocurrency. As a first purchase of crypto, if I purchase it from, let's say, a bank account that I hold, that is the transaction that is still easy to trace. But any subsequent transfers or purchase or sale of crypto is very, there's a huge degree of anonymity associated with it. It also makes cross-border transactions significantly easier. These are transactions that are typically sort of heavily regulated through several acts, and using crypto to transfer this sum of money circles around the applicability of those acts as of now. And I think that's why this apprehension of it being used in money laundering, in funding terrorism, I think that's essentially the root cause for these apprehensions.
Shehnaz, we should talk a little bit about digital currencies, or rather central bank digital currencies.
Sure. So now I think central bank digital currencies is essentially a digital version of the fiat currency. So it will be a digital version of your rupee. It will be issued by the central bank. So I think that's the main difference between most of these crypto assets or stable coins that we have talked about. In crypto assets, we do not really have a specific issuer. People generally are not aware of who the issuer is. In case of stable coins, perhaps there is there are private entities which are issuing it. But in central bank digital currencies, it will be the central bank which will issue it. It will be the central bank's liability. And essentially, it will work as like the cash that today we use, but a digital version of that cash.
Yeah, and perhaps who knows, in the future, this might be the way in which all physical currency disappears and all that we have are central bank issued digital currencies. And that may not necessarily be quote unquote cryptocurrencies, but they will be capable of being used as currency because it is being backed by the government. Its value is being determined by essentially the ability to trade it freely in large volumes, so there is little volatility, and that guarantee given that say 1 rupee will buy you exactly 1 rupee and can be used as 1 rupee elsewhere. That is what perhaps may ensure in the future. So just to summarize our discussion, some of the main points that we have discussed, we have sort of pointed out that cryptocurrency is perhaps not the right term for it, that it is not in fact currency. It is in some sense a sort of an asset. It is not an asset that is issued by the government. It is in fact something that develops out of code, which is the blockchain technology, which is a distributed ledger which keeps track of transactions. And that these cryptocurrencies, so-called cryptocurrencies, are a kind of asset whose value there is nothing underlying it, except in a certain category of cryptocurrencies known as stable coins, which are actually linked to existing currencies. One of the reasons why cryptocurrencies cannot be used as currencies because of the extreme volatility, but they are also used as quote unquote currencies because they offer a certain level of anonymity, and that level of anonymity coupled with the ease for cross-border transactions has meant that cryptocurrencies have gotten associated with illegal activity, although there is nothing per se illegal about it. They are something whose value is determined by people trading it freely and openly. And it may not be that they can be used as a medium of exchange or a legal tender, as we call the rest of our currency. It is not backed in any way by the government, but this is essentially a piece of code which you are saying is valued at this much.